Hello, everybody. My name is Lisa Vergin, and I'm working for the Nature and Biodiversity Conservation Union in Germany called NABU, which is also the German BirdLife partner. And I've been counting and working with my favorite bird species, the Buick swan, for some years now. And today I would like to show you some of the results of the research that we recently did. So I'm going to share my screen with you now. Yes, okay, all right. And northern Germany is actually a really great place for watching and studying Buick swans, as we have quite high roosting numbers here in winter. And in our talk today, I would like to focus on what are some of the influences that can affect the home range sizes of Buick swans that come to Europe and especially Germany during the non-breeding season. And like I said, we have a lot of Buick swans that come to northern Germany in winter. And despite the overall decline of this species, which has been noted for many decades now, we can actually see a steady increase of Buick swans that roost in winter in Germany, which seems to be an effect of climate change. We estimate that we might have 8,000 to 9,000 roosting swans during the peak season in early spring, as we recorded a maximum number of over 8,300 swans in our northernmost county, Schleswig-Holstein alone in 2018. And because of the increase of swans coming to Germany, the responsibility that we have as a country for this valuable species increases as well. And therefore, we started a 6-year project in the end of 2020 in order to develop a national species action plan for Buick swans. And our overall goals in this project are to better understand the habitat requirements of our swans, to increase our monitoring, identify potential threats, and in the end, to provide suitable conservation measures for this species. And in November 2021, we then started to deploy GMS GPS trackers from Monitella on Buick swans. And you can recognize our trackers by their yellow color and their 4-digit alphanumeric code that ends on T. We caught the swans by using cannon nets on maize fields, and we were able to deploy several trackers in Lower Saxony in Germany, but also some in Zealand in the Netherlands. So until now, we have data for one season and the first season in 2021-22. And in order to calculate home ranges for our Buick swans, we used the Brownian bridge kernel method that is applied in the Added Habitat HR package in R, and defined a home range of the home range as the 95% utilization distribution of the swan. And because we caught almost all of our swans in December, we started the period for the data analysis from the 1st of January to ensure the swans recovered fully from the stress a catching event can cause. And as we could see, that the average departure date for spring migration to the Baltic was on March 19, we chose the 18th of March as end date for our analysis. And in total, we analyzed 33 individuals, as we made sure that only one individual of a relationship was included, like of a partnership or family. And we selected data points every 30 minutes if available to calculate the home ranges. And as hinted before, used roosting data of our swans from wintering and staging sites before migrating to the Baltic. And the wintering and staging sites from our swans stretched from East England to West Poland and from Northeast France to Denmark. And to identify influences on home range sizes, we first looked at the influence the foraging habitat might have. And as habitat layer, we used the newest version of the open access Corine land cover data. But this data has a resolution of only 5 hectare and cannot distinguish between different crop types growing on a field. So the land cover data can distinguish between permanent grassland that is under agriculture use and non-irrigated arable land, but it cannot tell you the usage of the arable land. But due to our monitoring in Germany, and especially in the northern counties Schleswig-Holstein and Lower Saxony, we have a rather good idea about the usage of the fields that the swans are using here. And when being on arable land, the swans mainly feed on leftover maize fields, rape, or winter cereals. So therefore, we chose those 2 counties, Lower Saxony and Schleswig-Holstein in Germany, as our study sites for our habitat analysis. And we only looked at arable land and grassland as habitat type, because all other habitats are playing almost no role at all in terms of foraging sites here, and especially not in the time period from January to March. As we assessed foraging sites by selecting data 2 hours after sunrise until sunset, we chose fields where the swans have at least stayed half an hour to be considered as a foraging site. And we then plotted the number of fields used as foraging sites as sum per day in swan over the time period from January to March, and distinguished between the first and second half of a month. And by doing so, we can see an overall switch in habitat in our swans from arable land to grassland. And this general habitat switch from carbohydrate to protein-rich food was already noted in 1991 by Dirksen et al. In the Netherlands. And we can show that we have the same or similar situation here in Germany. And when looking separately at each county, we can also see that our swans use Lower Saxony mainly in the early season when feeding on arable land, while Schleswig-Holstein becomes more important later in the season when feeding on grassland. And to look at home ranges in different habitats, we compared the 2 months that differed the most from each other, with being the beginning of January in Lower Saxony and March in Schleswig-Holstein. And we can then see that home ranges are higher when the swans mainly forage on arable land than when foraging on grassland. And that is because the distance between night roost and foraging sites are greater when the swans are foraging on arable land than when foraging on grassland. And here you can see an example of one of our swans, 026T. And you can see how the distances could differ when the swan was feeding on arable land to the left and on grassland to the right. And we then were also interested if home ranges differed between different social classes, and therefore compared home ranges of families with non-breeding birds and birds without breeding success. And when looking at the mean home range size of these birds, so the average home range size a bird had when being in one area, there was no difference to detect. However, there's an indication that the total home range size differs, with families having smaller total home range sizes. And when looking at the number of visited areas, we can see a significant difference, with families visiting fewer areas than non or unsuccessful breeders. And we then wanted to see what the differences in the visited areas mean in the sense of habitat use for families. And for our German study sites, we can say that families show an overall higher percentage of use of arable land when looking at all months compared to the overall pattern of habitat use in Germany showed before. Plus, the habitat switch from arable land to grassland appears slightly later in families, with the main switch for them being in March, while the overall pattern showed a more obvious switch already in the second half of February. So to give some answers of what can influence the home range sizes of Bewick swans during the wintering season, we can say that both the habitat use and social status can have an influence. And for the habitat use, we see that home ranges are larger early in the season when the swans mainly forage on arable land than later in the season when the swans switch to forage mainly on grassland. And we can also see that when feeding on arable fields, distances between night roost and foraging sites are larger. But this seems to be worth it for the swans, as especially maize residues have a very high energetic value. But then these fields and the food supplies are exploited rather quickly, and new fields need to be found sooner. And studies on Hooper swans in Lower Saxony were able to show similar results on the effect of habitat use on the spatial use of the swans. And for families, we can see that families visited fewer areas than non-breeding or unsuccessful breeding birds, as well as that families had a general higher use of arable land. And from previous studies, it was known for families to differ to non- and unsuccessful breeders in terms of aquatic versus terrestrial habitat. And from our results, it seems that there's as well some difference within terrestrial habitat. And it has also been shown that when foraging aquatically, families switch earlier to arable fields than non-breeding birds or birds without breeding success. However, in our case, the families switched later away from arable fields to grassland, which indicates that families might just in general prefer arable fields. And reasons for that might be that juveniles show differences in foraging efficiency on different habitats, as it has been shown that juveniles have lower intake rates in aquatic habitats compared to adults, or that families as the dominant social class are more able to defend rich food patches on arable fields. And in the future of our project, we would like to study and understand the findings presented here even better, and to look more detailed into crop types of arable fields to see whether more detailed knowledge about, for example, habitat families might help to develop suitable conservation measures in order to support families and the species. And we would also like to better understand the connection between home ranges and distances between night roost and foraging size, so that we might get an idea about the threshold distance for being a suitable and commonly used night roost with surrounding food supplies. And with such knowledge, we could evaluate the situation in Germany to see whether we can establish more roosting areas for the swans. And within the following years, we will hopefully gather more data to back up our results of this first season. And we also want to look into how site fidelity influences the home range sizes of our tagged swans. And I would like to thank all of our project partners and money givers and supporters, and of course all my co-authors that helped me preparing this talk. And I would also like to thank you all now for listening and for your attention. And I'm very happy to answer any question that arises. And I would also like to draw your attention to our online map where you can follow our tagged swans, and as soon as well the swans from the Dutch research group of Bad Knowledge. So thank you all.